Rosalind, Karby, nee Zach. And my position was editor of the magazine, which was initiated about a year after the Federation was created, and I was its editor for, I don't know, for it seemed like forever, until I actually got hired by the Federation as their Director of Women's Division.
I'm Howard Karby. My involvement with Federation predates the actual founding of Federation. And it was really at the behest of Arthur Folks, who was really the single potent force that really brought Federation into being in Vancouver. A lot of people had talked about Federation for quite a number of years, but Arthur was the person who had the force, the strength, and the force of personality to bring it to the community and say that this was what we had to do. And Arthur asked me to sit as the chairman of the organizing committee to organize the Federation's first board and find its first president, and then let the Federation birth begin. From then, I sat on the board of the original board of the Federation, and I believe the executive, and I don't remember a lot of that. I just remember a lot of meetings and a lot of problems that seemed to come up every 10 years. And it was an exciting time.
Yeah. And he then chaired the campaign under the umbrella of the Federation.
Yes, I did.
Howard chaired the general campaign. When I was then the director, not just of the women's division,
Right.
but of campaign director. So I got to be boss of my husband.
I thought the volunteer was always the boss.
Yeah, well, you're right. Sort of like the customer is always right.
Yeah.
Why was it so exciting?
It was exciting because, at least in my memory, it was almost like we had two communities up till then. We had an organization called the Jewish Community Fund and Council, which dealt with all of the local organizations, and we had the UJA, of course, which dealt with Israel and all the overseas things. And it was, we ran essentially a split campaign. And my recollection is that Israel got 80% of the funds that was raised, and the Jewish Community Fund and Council got 20% of the funds that were raised. And that actually lasted for a while, and it was unsustainable, of course, because as the community grew, it had increased needs, and we actually had an organization that, certainly not always successful, was there to deal with those needs.
Oh, can I interject
Yeah.
also? So also part of the excitement was that we were joining North American communities. We weren't sort of isolated. I'm sure there were other communities that started out like we did with split campaigns, but we were becoming part of a very large family, including the United States and Eastern Canada. And there was an excitement about that. We started to go to the General Assemblies, and we met colleagues and people, peers like us, who were putting in hours of work. And it was more of a national, international exposure that we really had never had.
That's true. That's certainly true.
Why did you first get involved with the Federation?
If you were involved in UJA or Jewish Community Fund and Council, if you were the leaders in those two organizations, it was only natural that you would flow into the leadership of the Federation.
Yes, that's true. That's certainly true. And I think, to be quite honest, in both our cases, my parents were involved in their community in Regina, and certainly that was an influence. But Rosalind's family was extremely involved in the Vancouver Jewish community, and joining that family, it just seemed like
It was part of the marriage contract.
Yeah, it was.
You want to marry Rosalind, you have to be involved in the community.
That's right, and it was just that it just became an essential part of our lives.
What were the largest challenges faced by our community then?
Convincing the general masses that this was a good move for us. Convincing, particularly, I think anyways, the local institutions that were getting money from Jewish Community Funding Council to make them feel that they were not going to lose out by being absorbed sort of with UJA, which was very powerful in those years, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. I mean, Israel got the bulk of the money, and I think trying to convince the community and the community agencies to work together, to cooperate, to have a common, try to develop a common mission, I think that was a big challenge.
Even a common schedule was
schedule.
always a challenge.
Yeah. So I think that was, to me, that was the biggest challenge. And communicating to, not just to the organized sort of organizations, but just the man on the street, to make him realize that this federation was a family and that we were going to absorb them into the process of building the Vancouver Jewish community. There were also issues with the outlying communities, trying to get Richmond, New Westminster, the North and West Van to also feel part of this enterprise.
I don't think those issues have gone away.
What achievements are you most proud of during your time with Federation?
That's not an easy thing to say, because everything, even as I look back on it, was an advance of, inches as opposed to giant steps. But when I look at the community today and I see the involvement of young, dynamic people who are able to give and do give, I think that I think we always said that if you create something behind you, that is the greatest thing that you can do. And when I look at the community, I feel very proud that they're there like that. I think this is really a terrific community these days.
I agree with Howard with that. I think that the leadership, the past leadership, past executive directors have worked really hard to build young, dynamic leadership. On a personal note, though, my thrill was to be able to create, which no longer exists, but the Federation magazine, which was a wonderful tool for communicating with the community. I can't remember, to be honest, how many years we did it, quite a number. And it was a full-fledged, shiny, glossy magazine that communicated to the community on all the activities, all the missions, all the goals, all the issues, the key issues, through this one vehicle. And it was our main vehicle. It was published 4 or 5 times a year. We had an editorial board. We had an editor, that was me, and then subsequent editors after I left, and that's what I'm very proud of, even though it's now defunct, because technology has made it a different reality.
I think that when you're involved with Federation, and I think maybe even afterwards, you sort of think to yourself that the Jewish people's survival is at stake every day. It's at stake in what we do in our communities. It's at stake, it's what happens in Israel for sure. The survival of the Jewish people depends on, it's not very many people. We're not going to survive if we are not all involved and pitch in to the greatest extent we can. And I think to me, that's what Federation was always about. We learned many lessons. I mean, part of being involved in Federation was also the people that you were exposed to, and some of the great thinkers and people who came from different elements of the Jewish community than we did, and they talked about, they gave you I'm not preaching religion here, but they gave you an almost, what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know, because I don't know what you're trying to say.
They were saying that you were doing such a mitzvah, and they explained it to you, and they talked about it in terms of biblical terms, and you felt that you were part of that continuum from 5,000 years ago, and that the weight of that, our survival rested on each of our shoulders, and we all had to carry it.
In my view, every parent's responsibility is, especially if you have children, is to raise them, to be part of something bigger than themselves, to have them understand who they are, where they come from, what they're part of. So for me, it's a given. It's like my mother had a favorite expression, aim bray ra. I don't think we have a choice but to help build our communities so that our children and our grandchildren, which we're now in that position, have a community to grow into, have a support system, have other Jews who care about them, who care that their kids get a good education, that they go to good camps, that we take care of one another. All the sort of basic tikkun olam, and it sounds corny maybe, but it's not corny. If you don't do it, if it's not going to be us, who's it going to be? So everybody has a responsibility to do their bit. Some people can do more than others. Some people have leadership skills. They should use them. I don't want to give the impression that I don't think we also have a responsibility to the larger community. I think it's really important. And, I think Howard and I have tried to lend our support to other, non-Jewish enterprises because we are part of Vancouver. But we were just, part of it is just, that's the way we were raised. And it's just been part of our lives since we were kids. We were in youth groups. We were in young, Howard and I have been involved since we got married, really, which is like 51 years ago. So it's just part of our lives. We couldn't imagine. Now we're retired. Now we're happy not to do so much. But our kids are beginning to contribute, and they're, we see the results in our grandchildren, and I think it's been worth it. Every single difficult, challenging minute has been worth it.
In many ways, we were probably, at least in my mind, we were almost the last generation of people that we were even born during the Holocaust. Even though we were born here and we didn't experience it directly, it was a real part of our lives. I don't think that we can say that for the generation that comes after us. It is much more dim for them. So when I talk about survival, my view of survival was really survival.
It is the vehicle. In this city, in this community, the Federation provides the vehicle for taking care of each other. And if you want to help individual agencies, it doesn't preclude that. But the Federation is the one vehicle that is looking out for everybody, who is trying to assess the needs and meet those needs to the best of their ability. And to me, they are the agency that is creating the Greater Vancouver Jewish community.